Hey everybody, it's Johnny Two-Face here, back with another reaction video. And this time I'm reacting to the Siege of Syracuse 213 to 212 BC, Hannibal Part 21 by History March. And still reacting to their second Punic War series. So if you haven't seen my reaction to the previous episode in this series, I suggest you check those out before checking this one out. And still a well put together series. And without rambling on too long, I'll also say the usual disclaimer when I react to any historical content. If I don't show so much to be what is considered a proper reaction, it's probably obvious I don't know much about the subject at hand, and if I do know anything, I'll most likely pause the video to give my input or ask any curious questions, which hopefully will be answered in the comments. So with that being said, the link to the original video will be in the description down below. Please go and check out History March and hopefully subscribe to them and support their channel. And there's not much more I can say really without rambling on, so that's full screen. I'll bring this up here. Yep, captions are on for historical videos. And make sure everything's still good on my OBS. And let's see how this plays out.
It is spring 213 BC. While Hannibal was again on the offensive in the heel of Italy, two Syracusan veterans of his army, Hippocrates and Epicides, took command of the armed forces in Sicily. The genius of Archimedes has been utilized to overlook the city's defenses he was commissioned to build years ago by its deceased King Hero II.
I forgot this is where the great defense using Archimedes' inventions and was used.
Swarms of laborers and engineers put the finishing touches to his contrivances as the legions and fleet approach. The Roman navy sailing ominously into the port under the command of Proconsul Marcus Claudius Marcellus, while Appius Claudius Pulcher marches the land forces into place on the rise by the outskirts of the outer walls. With their armies hardened and well supplied, Marcellus and Appius are confident that the result will be hard fought, but sharply in their favor.
Yeah, it's a typical usually effective way to siege a city that's by the coast when it's attacked on land and sea. And as usual, they'll try and cut off supplies, so...
All that awaits is the call of the trumpets, the invocation of the gods, and the ancient city of Syracuse, so venerable it was founded just 2 decades after Rome, will ring with the sound of war.
Turn that down a bit.
Did you ever want to play a game that's similar to my videos? Well, what you see on screen is actual game footage. An old fan of my channel is making a game for PC that's inspired by my Hannibal series. I'm happy to announce Carthage Bellum Punicum. Its studio also needs your help. So let's gather as a community. Click the link below to wishlist the game now.
Feel free to check that out if you're interested.
The Roman camp is situated at Olympion, and from there the attacking ground forces of perhaps 2 legions plus auxiliaries move forward toward the Hexaplon Gate. Meanwhile, in the Great Harbour, 60 quinqueremes are led by a vanguard of 8 ships, lashed together in pairs and then mounted with waterborne siege towers. These gigantic sambuca, as such constructions are called by the men, is the secret weapon that Marcellus and Appius trust will allow their marines to cross the Acradina wall in the harbour and overcome the defenders behind. Marcellus's legionaries are not just determined. Many of them are veterans of the armies defeated by Hannibal, who subsequently fled to Sicily. Begging Marcellus for mercy and a chance to prove themselves, these deserters have joined the ranks in spite of the Senate's disapproval.
Well, yeah, because mostly they would have been put to death if they got caught while deserting, like they would in most armies of this time.
Not only bolstering Rome's Sicilian forces at a time when the great majority of the Republic's resources were directed elsewhere, but also providing Marcellus's existing cohorts with a strong incentive to show their superiority and outwork the disdained new arrivals. While the fleet sails into the Great Harbour, the ground forces see the defenders on the wall on both sides of the gate and prepare themselves for the looming trial.
Sorry, at first I didn't realise that sound was coming from the video, the trumpet sound, because I thought my phone was vibrating on my desk.
When the first bows are raised and a volley of arrows launched toward the oncoming Romans, those at the front form a testudo, while others come from behind, hauling the siege ladders. Additional legionaries hold up shields to protect the carriers.
Okay.
All so far is going to plan. The legionaries steel themselves for when they will climb the ladders once they are in place and fight their way onto the wall, stabbing and swinging their javelins back and forth to open the way. Roman archers and slingers launch their missiles to clear the stockade for the attackers. The legionaries shout to one another and stoke each other's confidence, some of the braver men putting their heads out from under the shields and shaking their hasta spears in the air. At first, no one is exactly sure what happens next. There is a sound like a heavy rope being swung through the air, and then one of the testudo units suddenly disappears. Not every man is initially aware of the threat. Even those at the rear lines are unsure what has happened.
Judging by the animation, it could be like for a ballista, or I think that this time they were known as scorpions. But also, I wouldn't be surprised if they used like a catapult that's basically fixed to a tower known as a mangonel, which sometimes fire one rock and others say they fire multiple.
Are still hunkering beneath their shields. But the sound repeats, and then another of the testudos is obliterated, blown into pieces as though some kind of divine hand reached down and swiped it from the battlefield. The legionaries peer through gaps in the shield walls, looking forward onto the palisades for the source of these extraordinary actions, but they remain
Correct me if I'm wrong, but weren't palisades mostly made of wood? I've never heard that name be given to, like, fortifications made of solid stone.
Unseen, hidden. This adds to their growing apprehension that something is wrong. Another testudo crashes and explodes. Then a new sound joins that of the pulsing whip. It's as though the legionaries are surrounded by rattling vipers, some of them even looking down at their collegae boots to avoid a bite. When they look up again, the first of the arrow bolts cuts through the shields and wrenches into the flesh of the men behind them. It is followed by a hailstorm of similar weapons. Those men in testudo who are not blasted by the strange whirring missiles are shredded by the evil arrows that are shot with such force by a concealed enemy that they can run through shields and bone and even paralyze a second man after eviscerating the first. The Roman line comes to a rise in the plain, and there, for the first time, they can see the source of their misery. Mangonels, catapults and scorpions by the score, all of them aimed and tightened to such precision that they can fire with a propulsion the Romans had thought only possible from a divine power. Finally, the mangled and now terrified survivors come within 30 feet of the wall, heaving breaths of relief that they are surely under the range of the mounted monsters, and soon they will be able to scale the parapets and get to grips with the men operating them. But it is not to be. An entirely new wave of arrows ratchets through their armor, cutting, shredding. The fine armor of the Romans seems like little more than flimsy foil. Their officers realize that the entire wall is perforated with dozens, possibly hundreds of killing holes, angled so that they are wide enough for a...
Which I've only seen them being used on gatehouses. More, not the actual wall.
an archer to aim and fire point blank, but virtually impossible for the attacking soldiers to return fire in kind. While a very few of the most ardent and fearless get within touching distance of the barrier and attempt to place the ladders, they are quickly inundated by falling boulders and even beams, so many hundreds of libra in weight that surely even a squad of men could not lift them, let alone throw them high in the air. The sight of their comrades flattened beneath such monstrosities, blood and viscera running in the dirt, is too much for even the most robust and sturdy of Roman centurions. Finally, the attack falters, and those still living run back toward the safety of their line, their commanders unwilling to send more men forward into what is certain death. The Syracusans on the wall by the gates erupt in cheers, as do the townspeople behind, who receive news that the Roman attack has been a failure. Meanwhile, in the great harbour, the fleet and the amphibious units are unaware that any of this is taking place. They ply the water serenely, proud and deadly, awaiting the moment they can land and unload their lethal force of marines onto the monumental but delicate-looking Greek port. Still, the churning waves of the Ionian Sea lap around their prows, their rams waiting for any Syracusan or Carthaginian ship foolish enough to storm out and engage them. But even out there, hundreds of yards from shore, arrows and missiles begin to fall onto the decks, many of them hitting targets among the unsuspecting sailors and waiting ground forces. The shower becomes a cascade the nearer the ships get to the harbour. Any man with a shield puts it above his head and tries to stay out of harm's way. They watch as arrows and bolts embed themselves in the timbers of the deck. Shouts of pain come from all around as the machines find their mark. Still, the quinqueremes move forward. Those strangely long arrows, still not enough to stop such powerful craft. Yet as they pass the 200-yard mark from the seawall, the missiles begin to fire straight forward rather than coming from an arcing path high in the air. And they are fired with a power that even weathered sailors have not seen in their many years of breaching coastal strongholds. Worse still, huge boulders and beams, similar to those lobbed at the legionaries underneath the wall at the Hexaplon Gate, lurch from the sky, and the Romans can only watch helplessly to see whether they are going to make a hideous and mortal landing on their own vessel. To their commanders' disbelief and consternation, ships begin to halt, scuppered by gaping holes riven through their decks and hulls. Water rushes in, immobilizing some of the ships, while dragging others to the bottom. The fusillade is an unprecedented defense, yet the officers and captains aboard the ships grit their teeth and order the signal to advance sounded once more. The majority of the 6 ships reach the harbour, and preparations begin for the landing. The Sambuca are in front, and the men at their head are already priming their own scorpions and missile piles to clear the walls. Just as those on the land side had anticipated finally getting to grips with the enemy, so too do the naval archers and marines holding javelin and bow. What happens next is like something from their nightmares. Without any forewarning, huge arms of timber and metal swing out over the wall, bringing with them fantastic-looking objects tied to their ends. The first of these arms comes to a sharp halt over the deck of a quinquereme, and the men below look up at it with frantic alarm. From a height several meters over their heads, a gigantic block falls from its grasp, a long chain to which it is attached falling after it. The massive stone slab pulverizes everything it touches, gravity forcing it ever downward with terrifying speed. Men and timbers are rent apart, and the ship quickly disappears beneath the surface. This ignites a panic as the sailors try to abandon ship, throwing themselves overboard, where the majority sink due to their armor. Others are knocked and killed by collisions with snapping timbers and nearby ships. For the rowers in the lower decks, there is little hope at all. What comes next is worse. The arm from which the block had been dropped suddenly swings around, pulling both the wreckage of the ship and the men still clinging to its splinters up and out of the water. Again, just as happened on the land side, to those watching, it is as if the ship has been lifted up and thrown by the hand of a god. This action repeats all along the harbor wall. Archimedes' devices making use of pulleys and counterweights to create forces that a normal man would think impossible, even close to witchcraft or some other supernatural force.
Not just the graphics, I do love the sound design in these videos.
At the same moment that the Romans believe that the situation cannot get any worse, an enormous claw juts over the harbor. As it moves into position, its shadow looms over the fleet below. Then, it suddenly wrenches a ship completely out of the water. The men either jump or are thrown overboard. Finally, the gigantic contraption tosses the vessel aside, smashing it against the waves. By now, the Roman Sambuca have been made completely inoperable, and the retreat is sounded. It has been a dark day for the Roman army. Marcellus is faced with a labor that he had been hoping to avoid at the outset of the Syracuse campaign. The city itself has myriad defensive lines stretching out from the initial island heartland on Ortygia, with its citadel holding the causeway that links it with the outlying areas of Acradina, Neapolis, Tyche, and Epipolae. The higher area of Epipolae is protected by the wall of Dionysius, through which the Romans have already failed to make an incursion. Even the furthest points of the city and this perimeter are guarded by the stout battlements of the fortress of Euryalus. As the summer rolls on, rumors and stories abound by the Roman campfires at night of ships catching flame upon the waves, seemingly spontaneously. Their dry, cracked timbers lit by the sorcery of Archimedes, and a contrivance he has constructed using large numbers of mirrors.
Which, if I remember right, was nicknamed by loads of people who learned about this as the world's first death ray, if I remember rightly.
Mounted on the walls. Upon consideration of the situation in the city and the island as a whole, Marcellus decides to split his forces and cover both of his objectives at the same time. He leaves Appius with 2/3 of the army and the naval forces to blockade the city, while he moves off with a column to engage the Sicilian cities like Helorus, Megara, and Herbesus that have declared themselves for Hannibal and the Carthaginians. Meanwhile, news of the Roman travails in the face of Syracuse's walls and Archimedes' engines has reached the Carthaginian high command, and in a break with their usual timidity, a new army is dispatched under Himilco to exacerbate the ordeal. Word reaches Marcellus that Himilco has set sail with a force of near 30,000 men, consisting of perhaps 25,000 infantry, 3,000 cavalry, and a dozen elephants. When Himilco lands at Heraclea Minoa and moves toward Agrigentum, his journey to Sicily facilitated by the ever-growing naval forces of the Carthaginian admiral Bomilcar. Word reaches the Syracusans through Appius's loose blockade, and Hippocrates moves out of the city with perhaps 10,000 men to join him, relieving some of the pressure on the city's shrinking supplies. Marcellus moves as quickly as he can to block Himilco from establishing a defensible position at Agrigentum, but the Carthaginian beats him to the punch. Instead, Marcellus runs quite by chance into Hippocrates and annihilates his Syracusans in the field. His men no doubt taking some pleasure in engaging the Syracusans without the mortal dread that they now associate with Archimedes' machines. It's a thumping victory for the Romans. Hippocrates' entire force of 10,000, with the exception of a small band of a few hundred cavalry he flees with to safety, is either cut down by the legion or else put in chains. Hippocrates manages to reach sanctuary with Himilco, but Marcellus is unwilling to try his luck against another fortified position, and so he returns to Appius and the main Roman army outside Syracuse.
1 second. Sorry, my foot was knocking things over.
It's possible that he is attempting to lure Himilco to follow him, although this would be a dangerous game when the Carthaginian has a force 2.5 times the size of his own. More likely, Marcellus is hoping to reach his own refuge in the now well-established lines outside Syracuse. The two armies complete the march and then stand face to face. For a time, Marcellus and Appius fear attack from both the city and the army outside, but Himilco's assault never transpires, and instead he withdraws anticlimactically to Agrigentum for winter quarters.
Okay, for winter quarters.
The new year and the new campaign season brings bad tidings for the Roman cause, not only because Syracuse still stands defiant, nearly a full 12 months since the first attack that saw the destruction of so many centuries of the legions and ships of the line. Tarentum in South Italy, like Syracuse, has thrown off its commitments to Rome and now sided with Hannibal. And with the successors of Alexander the Great in the still powerful state of Macedon already allied with Hannibal, Carthage could potentially use the ports of Syracuse and Tarentum to threaten the Roman control of the sea, even possibly allowing for the landing of a Macedonian army in Italy to aid Hannibal. This would be a nightmare scenario for the Romans, and Marcellus is hard-pressed to allow the situation to continue. Nevertheless, Archimedes and the inspired Syracusan defenses make the capture of the city seem an impossibility. The blockade to force starvation is not working either, as both Hippocrates has been able to move out of the city by land, and Bomilcar is able to reach the port by sea. Another legion arrives to reinforce the besieging army, bringing Marcellus's force up to possibly 4 legions in total, along with an equivalent number of auxiliaries and allied forces, 20,000 men or more. But the almost certain death toll from another attempt at storming the walls is the problem to which he has no solution. Bread is rationed within the walls, but Syracuse seems to still be far from real hunger. Marcellus must act. The plan that bears fruition comes from a hunch he has that the weak point of the Syracusan defense is located near a tower called Galliagra. An arranged meeting on the exchange of prisoners with a party of Syracusan officials near the tower provides one of Marcellus's officers with the opportunity to reconnoiter the spot and count the number of blocks in the wall. From this, Marcellus calculates the height of the defenses and has his men build ladders of an appropriate length to scale them. Compared to the genius and complexity of Archimedes' wizardry, it is laughably simple stuff. But the Syracusans are not laughing when on the 3rd day of a drunken festival thrown to lighten the mood among the besieged populace, legionaries scale the wall near the Galliagra tower in the dead of night and butcher the unwary guards like animals. Syracuse and its leaders awake at dawn to find that an elite Roman unit has opened a hexaplon gate, leaving the bodies in the towers stacked high, and upwards of an entire legion is now streaming into the city. This onrushing force brushes aside Epicides' attempts to repel it with all the momentum of an army that has waited long months for such an opportunity, and in the aftermath, most of the city, including the fort at Euryalus, falls. The only exceptions are Acradina, the harbours, and Ortygia. Epicides and Hippocrates take what is left of their army and hole up in these sectors. All hope is not lost yet, for salvation might be on the horizon. Hippocrates escapes the rattled and desperate city, and when he returns some weeks later, he is riding alongside Himilco and his army, who have arrived to lift the siege. Marcellus and Appius turn the great part of their force to face this new threat, now in a worse state than they were when Himilco last threatened their positions, for they are strung out between their former camp and the new positions within the city. Himilco sends out skirmishers to find the vulnerable point in the Roman line, and Marcellus's own troops engage them across the broad front of Syracuse plains and rises. All seem set up for a battle of monumental proportions amidst the walls, towers, and temples of the city, as well as in the fields and laneways outside. But then Rome is once more gifted by the hand of fortune, and disease breaks out in Himilco's camp. The same sickness travels to the Roman environs over the next months, but the well-ordered Roman castra, as well as their diffused positions in the city, reduce its deleterious effects amongst the legionaries. In Himilco's ranks, the disease takes on the proportions of a plague, likely aided by their proximity to the marshes of the Anapo River, and he, along with Hippocrates, die in its virulent passage. The remainder of the Carthaginians are forced to withdraw, to the dread and distress of the watching Syracusans. No sooner have their seeming saviors abandoned the field than their spirits are lifted once more, however, for Bomilcar, the Carthaginian admiral of its now once more formidable navy, arrives in sight of the city. It is now approaching the end of the year, and the defenders and the Carthaginians know that the Romans will act soon to avoid another winter camped outside the walls. The buffeted and battered Syracusans gawp and cry out with joy at Bomilcar's massive fleet of 150 warships and 700 merchantmen. The Roman fleet has been reinforced to 100 ships since the disastrous attempt to storm the Great Harbor the previous year, but it cannot hope to withstand such an array of power 1.5 times its size. Their commander decides to do something completely audacious. A storm that whips in to delay Bomilcar's armada gives Marcellus time to draw up his forces on the far side of the Pacinum Cape, and then he brazenly drives his fleet forward in a direct line to Bomilcar's position. For a long time, the Romans watch the motionless Carthaginian ships as their own hulls cut through the foamy waves and the wind whips at their rears. But then Bomilcar's ships turn and withdraw.
Okay.
The Carthaginian admiral has blinked, and he moves with his warships toward Tarentum, while the transports are sent back to Carthage. Marcellus turns his attentions back to the bereft and abandoned Syracusans, and it is said that those closest observe him weeping at the fate that now awaits their great city. With infighting and dissent now rampant within the remaining walls, offers of assistance come to the Roman commander's hearing, and it is an Iberian mercenary named Mauricus and a Syracusan coppersmith called Sossus who open the gates of Ortygia and Acradina for the legions when the final attack begins. The fighting is swift and brutal. The pent-up aggression of men who have endured a full 1.5 years of frustration and defeat let loose like a torrent, and the sack that follows is more violent still. Countless artworks, treasures, and former citizens now turned slaves are hauled from the burning streets. The great towers of a once shining city, now merely blackened shells. In spite of Marcellus's warnings, Archimedes dies in the pillage, seemingly because he was not quick enough to follow the orders of a sword-happy legionary. Sicily is strategically secure for the Roman cause, but perhaps even more significantly for that city's long-term culture, the gargantuan collection of artworks looted from Syracuse's fine houses and palaces turn heads in a new appreciation for Greek genius in austere and frugal Rome. This discovery will change Rome far more than any military victory. But for the meantime, there is the matter of Hannibal, his continued existence in Italy, as well as the matter of Macedon. Syracuse is a tremendous addition to Rome's growing imperium, but the war is not over yet. If you like what you see, consider supporting my work on Patreon, and you get ad-free early access.
I'll just read these notes. Syracuse was a thorn in Rome's side that could not be ignored due to its strategic importance. Its capture was a bitter blow for Hannibal, as Rome could redirect significant resources in manpower, ships, provisions, and commanders to other theaters. Hannibal would feel the brunt of the massive shift. Furthermore, the capture of Syracuse by Rome marked the end of the independence of the Greek cities of southern Italy and Sicily. Marcellus considered Archimedes a valuable asset and ordered that he should not be harmed. He was greatly angered by his killing. Archimedes' death at the hands of a soldier who was either impatient or wanted to steal his instruments, thinking they were valuable, stripped Rome of the opportunity to harness Archimedes' knowledge for their war aims. Archimedes' works were written in Doric Greek, the dialect of ancient Syracuse. Much of his work did not survive, and is extant in edited fragments. At least 7 of his treatises are known to have existed. Okay, so get that off screen, and this has been another interesting and well-made video by History March, and the outcome surprised me, because I thought the Syracusans and Carthaginians were going to keep hold of Sicily, but still got to wait to see what awaits for Hannibal on the mainland Italy. So So it's been another good video. So if you like this reaction, please like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.